the outlook for copper is fabulous. Where do I invest? Well, we have 4 great copper stories now for you back to back. The first is POLARX. Their Alaskan Range project sounds cold, but I'm sure it's hot. To explain all about POLARX, please welcome the Managing Director, Frazer Tabeart. Hey, Frazer.
Thanks, Andrew. That graph that was just shown explains sort of my emotions over the last 6 weeks during a capital raising. We've seen it all in 6 weeks, let alone over the last 2 or 3 years. But we have successfully raised some money, so I can now tell you how we're going to spend that money. So yeah, POLARX, ASX listed, but a project in Alaska. I'd like to sort of spend the next 15 minutes just explaining what we're about, why we believe Alaska is a great place to operate for copper and gold, and a little bit about the projects themselves and the work programs that we've got underway, particularly over the next 2 to 3 months. So the usual cautionary statements there, which I'm sure you've all read before. This slide sort of captures really what this company is about. We have a contiguous package here of about 240 square kilometres of state mining claims in Alaska. It's about a 6-hour drive north and east of Anchorage, so by Alaskan standards, very good logistics, very easy to get to. POLARX came about in July last year. It's the merger of the former Coventry Resources, which had the earning rights on this block of ground, and a private vehicle called Vista Minerals that owns this project here 100%. The merger was completed in July last year, coupled with a capital raising supported by institutional investors from London and Asia, and to some extent Australia. We have 2 JORC resources on this project. We have about 3 million tonnes at 3% copper at Caribou Dome. For the geologists in the audience, that's a massive sulphide, a VMS style of deposit. And then here at Zackly, we have a skarn deposit. And skarn deposits are important in that they often occur in association with much larger porphyry copper deposits. And that's a thesis that I want to just develop over the next 10 minutes. As I said, it's about 35 kilometres strike length and about 240 square kilometres in total. The share register is pretty tightly held. I think the top 20 now own about 75%. We just completed a $2.5 million capital raise, so we've got about $3.5 million cash at the moment. And you can read the list of shareholders there, so I won't go through that in any detail. Last 6 months, after doing the initial capital raise, we did some drilling at Zackly to put a historical resource into JORC, relatively small at this stage, about 3.5 million tonnes, at a copper equivalent grade of about 2.7, 2.8%. If we add that with the Caribou Dome resource, we've got a total project inventory of about 280 million pounds of copper, about 215,000 ounces of gold and 1.5 million ounces of silver. It's not enough, but it's a good start. Both of those deposits are open at depth and along strike. We're in a very good location. I'm not going to go through any detail here, but the project location straddles the boundary between the Tintina Gold Belt to the north and Cretaceous Porphyry Copper Belt to the south. This copper belt hosts the world-class Pebble deposit, about 11 billion tonnes at 0.3 copper, 0.3 gold, along with a number of other porphyry coppers here and through into southeast Alaska and British Columbia. And on this regional image, you'll see there's a very prominent structure here, which we'll see in the subsequent geology map. And our project lies at the intersection of the terrain boundary and that prominent structure, which at its other end has a series of porphyry coppers, plus the Kennecott copper mine. And I don't know if any of you are aware of Kennecott. Kennecott was the world's highest grade copper mine, 4.6 million tonnes at 13% copper, now unfortunately mined out. A geology map, very briefly, northeast trending structures here, which marks that terrain boundary between the Tintina Gold Belt and the Porphyry Belt, and then a series of northwest trending faults here, which is the local manifestation of that major regional fault. And along that, we see a number of intrusions that we can see in regional geophysics which we believe represent a potential cluster of porphyry-style deposits. And the sort of empirical evidence for that is the Zackly deposit itself. Very quickly here, this is the regional airborne magnetics. The reason we like it so much is you can see targets such as this here, where we have a magnetic core, which is about 1.5 kilometres in diameter, surrounded by a zone of magnetic destruction. That's a very typical signature you see in porphyry coppers, where the central intrusive that brings in the fluids with the copper in it is magnetite stable, but the fluids that come out destroy the magnetite and the surrounding rocks. So that's the type of signal we look for. And then when we couple it with regional soil sampling, and we see here we've got a huge copper anomaly. This is 11 kilometres by 6 kilometres at greater than 250 ppm copper. You don't see many of those. And then within it, the highs at over 400 ppm are often associated with these intrusions, and in many cases also associated with surface gold anomalism. So certainly geophysics, geochemistry, regional setting, and empirical evidence are the right types of systems. Zackly itself, as I said, is a skarn. Very simple geology here, where we have a limestone which has been intruded by an old diorite intrusion. That's formed a skarn, which in this case is very weakly mineralised with copper, iron, and a little bit of molybdenite. And then there's a much later overprint, always on this contact between the limestone and the skarn, and that's where we get high-grade copper, gold, and silver. And in this case, the mineralogy is dominated by bornite and cobalite, which are sulfide minerals that hold twice as much copper per unit volume than your normal chalcopyrite. So any concentrates we get from this are going to be very high grade in copper, probably 35 to 40% or thereabouts, although I do stress we haven't yet done any metallurgy testing, so yeah, bear that in mind. The gold there is coarse and free milling, unlikely to come out in a gravity circuit. Geometry is very simple. It's basically a tabular ore body, a few cross-cutting faults and a little bit of rotation, steeply dipping, about 4.5 metres wide on average, and open in all directions. So this is a long section of the resource block model. This is the copper grade. You can see there are some very weak trends within that, not really enough pierce points to be fully confident of that. But this block model here, this is the 3.5 million tonnes at about 2.6, 2.7% copper equivalent. The white lines here is a drilling program that is about to start. We're going to kick that off in about 3 weeks' time. It's about 5,000 metres of drilling. The goal there is to obviously get deeper pierce points on the long section, fill in some of the gaps, and extend this a long strike to the south and the east. And one of the reasons for extending that a long strike is, if we go back to our geophysics, this is the faulted contact between the limestone and the skarn, which hosts Zackly. There's the Zackly mineralisation. If we follow that to the south and east along that fault is heading in the direction of this possible buried intrusive. And the only reason there's no surface geochemical signature here at what we refer to as Zackly southeast is that's entirely covered under tundra and under a little bit of glacial till. So that's effectively blind to surface geochemistry. A little bit about Mars in particular. Mars, there was some rock chip sampling and soil sampling done here a number of years ago, but no grain geophysics done on this until last year. We undertook a very short program of IP surveying, looking specifically for porphyry coppers in September last year. Now I've just turned the view round a little bit, so we're now looking to the southwest obliquely. The actual magnetic anomaly sort of extends over a much larger area here of about 4 by 2 kilometres. On the northern rim is a 2 kilometre long by 1 kilometre wide copper in soil anomaly at greater than 250 to 400 ppm. In that area there are a number of gullies. This is quite a sort of a hilly area. There are a number of gullies and ravines there with small outcrops of faults and breccia zones. Where they've been sampled, they're up to 7.5% copper and up to 2 grams gold. I'm not by any means suggesting those are going to be the grades in anything underneath, but they certainly show that there's a live system there. And then this sort of amoeboid shape here is a surface projection of an IP chargeability anomaly, which is about 100 to 150 metres below surface. This has never been drilled. And in fact, this IP anomaly was only discovered in September last year, so we're very keen to get a drill rig out on that target later this year. Just a little bit about Alaska. It's a long way away from Australia, about 49 hours by various air carriers. As I said though before, the project's actually in a very good location. We're about a 6.5-hour drive northeast of Anchorage. Two ways to get in there. One of the easiest ways is straight up the main highway, which is sealed all the way, and then an all-weather dirt road, the Denali Highway. We're about 100 kilometres to the west of that, to the east of the road, and at that point on the road, the railway also goes there. There's a siding, and we can load concentrates onto a train here, take that down to the ports of either Anchorage or Seaward here, both of which are open all year round, both of which can cater for sort of 50 to 60,000 tonne ships. Alaska itself is host to some world-class deposits. You've got the Red Dog mine right up in the northwest there. That's the world's richest zinc mine. You've got the Pebble project, which I referred to before, which is now going through a resurrected permitting phase. First Quantum have got an option on that may, if they exercise that option, see them spend $1.5 billion to take a 50% ownership of that project. Donlin, 80 million ounces of gold in resource, 40 million ounces of gold in reserves. The EIS has just been approved to go to public scrutiny. Quite likely that project will be fully permitted by August this year and will become one of the world's biggest gold mines. Things like then Pogo, 12 million tonnes at 12.5 grams gold, fully permitted in operation. Very, very nice operation. So you can see there's some fabulous deposits here. They're either very large or very high grade, or in some cases both. That's one of the reasons we're here. It's elephant country. It's been relatively underexplored because of past permitting issues, which are now largely behind us under the new administration. And as the state of Alaska realises that its previous reliance on royalty revenues from oil and gas is not really good in a diversified economy. So there's a huge state push and federal push now to get projects permitted. And we've certainly seen in the last 6 to 8 months a real change of attitude there from particularly the state-based, but also the federals. As I said, in our case, because we're all on state mining claims, there really is very little federal jurisdiction over our project block, except if any mining operations would have an impact on wetlands, in which case we need to work with the Army Corps of Engineers. As I mentioned earlier, we've just finished a capital raise. We're putting that money straight back into the ground, predominantly into increasing the resource at Zackly. Our view is we would like to double or triple that resource over the next 1 to 2 field seasons, as we believe 10 million tonnes at those grades forms a very strong basis for a potential mining operation. And we'd like to get line of sight to that as early as possible and get that into some form of economic study. So drilling likely to get underway in early June, and then we can drill basically out till probably somewhere into mid to late October, subject to when the winter arrives. So in conclusion, basically we've got here what we believe is a very robust project, particularly for large-scale porphyry copper gold discoveries, but also with a value that's underpinned by the potential for around about 10 million tonnes of high-grade skarn mineralisation, plus another 3 to 5 million tonnes of 3% copper at Caribou Dome. It's in a good location. It's being well supported by government and local stakeholders, and we're about to go drilling. So please watch this space. Thank you for your time.